All right, so continuing on, I think a very integral episode to Sid Carmy as a whole, to their dynamic and just their overall um, I don't know, the way that they function within the show as well as what they mean to each other, which can kind of be like understated another time, is episode 2X9 or the ninth episode of season 2. It's called Omelet. I didn't include that in the slide, but yeah, Omelet. So anyway, this episode, yeah, it's like a turn also in terms of like fandom because after this episode, a lot more people started shipping Sid Carmy online, or at least seeing the potential of them being more than just friends. Which is interesting because then they kind of like backpedal and like change it. But this episode was clear. Like, there's not that many people that actually didn't see the potential after this episode. Or if you did, okay, that's fine. Not really, but it was like a big wave basically in terms of Sid Carmy fandom. So there's a lot of scenes within this show, but we're gonna do um talking about mostly Sydcarmy scenes, and of course Sydcarmy scenes that are very important. The first one being the panic attack scene. It's like near the beginning of the episode. Well, there are other moments. We're just gonna talk about these couple scenes. So the panic attack scene um happens where Carmi's like really like anxious about the restaurant, about his relationship with Claire. And so basically he just like starts really like not even, almost hyperventilating. Yeah, actually he kind of does start hyperventilating, but he has like a panic attack. Um, and he's trying to like think of different things to calm down. I think he's really stressed because the restaurant's supposed to be opening soon. They're running out of time. There's like a test that needs to go, or a test, excuse me, a test that just got for like a test that just went forward, but they're still under a very big time crunch to open. Because, of course, the beginning of the season, season 2, they shortened their timeline from 6 months to only having 3 months open at this restaurant. So, anyway, he's like panicking. He starts to think about Claire, and it's interesting, like, there's not text, but it seems like he's thinking about Claire to try to calm down from his panic attack. But instead of making his panic attack better, as he thinks about his like family trauma, it actually makes it worse. So he keeps panicking. We get a flashback to the morning where they were having a time. Um, Actually, they weren't because you can kind of see him dissociating in that scene. Anyway, so he like starts thinking that morning, basically, with Claire also being present that morning, if you know what I mean. And he still doesn't calm down. His panic attack gets worse and worse and worse. And it's like quick cuts, quick cuts. This is the Bear editors, not any fanfic or any fandom editors. This is the Bear. You can look up the clip yourself. But then he starts to think of Sydney, and he thinks like, you're the most excellent CDC at the most excellent restaurant. It's like only showing Sydney, her walking into the restaurant for the first time, her coming back to the restaurant after leaving. And he starts to like breathe suddenly, like he starts to calm down. And when you read that scene, it's like, what just happened? It's very interesting because um it's an interesting contrast, I guess, because he starts to think about his girlfriend, official of the episode, or last just the previous episode, and he doesn't calm down, but then he thinks of Sydney, his business partner, and then he's suddenly calm. And he's kind of like brought into this peace. And of course the music gotta play the music, what the music's gonna do, and it says like you will be mine all the time. And it's like, why are you playing this music at this moment? But it's kind of interesting, like, okay, this panic attack scene, there's like a point to it, or is there, with Sydney kind of being the catalyst for Carmy's calmness. So of course after that, there's a couple more scenes with them. But then there's a scene which we all know. I have the picture right here, the under the table scene. Tell me this is the only under the table scene. There is another one in season 4, but we're not talking about that. This is the first under the table scene with only the two of them. You see this like beautiful lighting, and it just over the course of the shot, it pans into Sydney and Carmy having this like really intimate, very personal conversation underneath this table. A couple standout lines from this scene are, "I don't want you to think I was jealous," because Sydney shares like, "Oh, like I'm sorry for saying like like your attention shouldn't be split." And then there's like these lines where Carmi's like, "I wouldn't want to do this without you, as in do this restaurant without you. Like you make me better at this." And then she even replies like, "You make me better at this." There's this moment where he like notices her like carrying this, and he's like, you love taking care of people." Like it's really a moment of them acknowledging that they are both special people to each other, and in order for this restaurant to thrive, maybe not just this restaurant, they do need to be reliant on each other. And they admire each other. Yeah, as I mentioned before, there's like this other moment of like I don't want to share your focus. I'm sorry. Cindy says that to Carmen, which is kind of interesting. Or like it's her attention not his attention not having to be split. And then there's this moment of Carmi saying like, "Yeah, it's your ship now, Captain. Like, actually, Sydney, like you are in charge now. Like I'm stepping back, you are in charge." Which is an interesting contrast from like season one, where he's like, "Actually, still your boss, even though you're kind of doing everything, I'm still the boss." But in this case, he's like, "You are actually the boss." All right. So then we get to, I think, the angsty part of Sydcarmy. But season three, I titled it, "It's hard to keep up with you sometimes," because that's a line from like this over the table scene that they have, which I think I include a picture of in the next slide. But basically, this season is more about how like the quest for perfection inhibits people from actually contributing and working together in a like functional way. Um, so I think I mentioned at the end of last season, Carmi has this moment where he's stuck in the fridge. He's like, get Sid, but he's stuck in the fridge, and ultimately, he like kind of loses his girlfriend that day. Like Claire, she comes by, she like overhears the conversation he has, and she like she misreads basically the situation, but she walks away, and Carmi's like left alone, and he like thinks he can never talk to her again. He thinks he's ruined the night for the restaurant because he was out of like he wasn't focused on the restaurant because he was kind of being avoidant, as I mentioned before. So that's kind of like where we start off the next season. It's like the morning after or so. And that's kind of where that top right picture is, with them like kind of having this brief conversation or debrief really, in the morning after the friends and family night. So it's interesting in this season, Carmi's goal of perfection, after he thinks he's ruined everything, is kind of like why they clash a lot in this season. Or it's not even clashing, it's just not really like speaking, um sort of like past each other instead of speaking at each other, or more Carmi speaking like past Sydney, and Sydney just kind of shutting down. Um, and it's interesting because it's all in pursuit of the star. I didn't mention this in season two, but it starts with Sydney wanting to have a star. She's like, "We should try to get a star." He's like, "No, we shouldn't." Carmi's like, "We shouldn't be aiming for a star. If we do, you're gonna have to consider everything. What is it? You have to prioritize everything over anything," or something like that. Like he's saying, like you have to completely focus on this if we're gonna try to go for a star. And it's like a trap and like all these bad things. But then in season three, he's like, "We're getting a star. I'm going to get us a star. Like, I will get a star." And it's like because he thinks that he messed up so bad in the previous season. Now he's trying to like make up for it, or prove that he can really be like he can be the fine dining king that he once was. Which is interesting because it's tied to something that Sydney wants, that he said he didn't want. He even uses this phrase like to Sydney. He said like, "I thought this is what you wanted," which is kind of interesting. And there's also this argument about like wants versus needs, and we'll cover that in season 4. But yeah, he's like trying to pursue something that he thinks that she wants, that he thinks that he now needs. But ultimately, girl, you don't need a star. You do not need a star. Again, there's like, yeah, a contrast between what Sydney actually wants and what he thinks she wants, and they do not communicate well at all this season. He's very intense. Carmi's very intense this season. There are a few moments, not really. It's a lot of like Carmi saying, "I need to do this," and him not really paying attention to anything else but focusing on like changing the menu every day and making all these like extreme measures in order to um get what Sid wants. I'm saying that in quotation marks. Um, so of course, in the bottom picture, we see the question of partnership that comes up again this season, and it's like, are Carmi and Sydney actually partners? Is Carmi working as the only person running the restaurant? Is Sydney able to be on her own as well? And it's interesting because we get Sydney um, kind of like introduced to this new opportunity and maybe being able to have her own restaurant and work separately and not at all like around Carmen. I'm using Carmen because he's in the doghouse right now. But yeah, it's like another common thought of the season is like the pressures of chasing a review. Or like, if you want to have the perfect review, how is that gonna like impact how you interact with other people? Um, and that kind of does like affect Sydney and Carmi's relationship this season. They're pretty distant this season and they don't really communicate well at all. Like probably worst season of communication. So, some standout scenes would be, of course, we have episode 1 of season 3. It's like this whole, it's a very interesting episode. I do like it. It's a little depressing, but it shows like Carmi's arc throughout his life and kind of what led to the morning after Friends and Family. And of course, this does include this moment where he hears of Michael's passing. Um, before this moment, just not to get ahead of myself, as I mentioned before, they have this debrief, and Carmi's like, "I left you alone," um, and it won't. He says like, "It won't happen again," or she's like, "Don't let it happen again." She's like, "It won't happen again." So it's like them kind of realizing that the two of them are very important. It's interesting. Carmi actually said, I think before that, he's like, "You made it." Like, because Sydney's like, we made it, we finished the day. And he's like, "No, I was stuck in the freezer, you made it." And then she's like, "Yeah, me with everybody else." And so he's like, "I left you alone." So it's kind of interesting. It's like, Carmi clearly does value Sydney, and he like kind of he sees the value of having her in his life, at least to the extent, I definitely think more, but at least to the extent of being a business person that he works with to make the restaurant better. And he feels like horrible that he wasn't there for them. Um, and then, of course, we also have the ending where he finds out Michael's dead. He decides to do this like one act of rebellion against David Fields, which is like the abusive boss chef that I mentioned earlier. And instead of like creating a hamachi with fennel, which he's supposed to make, he does this one different dish where he does like a blood red hamachi. He like uses an orange instead of using fennel. And he lies and says like this person had a fennel allergy. So we're gonna do blood orange instead of having fennel. Um And of course, that's like the image on the bottom. You see, like, it kind of looks a little heart shaped, which was confirmed by Joanna Cal, the queen. She's like, it kind of looks like a bleeding heart. Oh, really? Does it look like a bleeding heart? And of course, this is a one of one dish. Like, there's only one person that got this dish because it was just one act of rebellion. And it goes to Sydney. it's a very important reveal in the show, but it shows that Sydney, the one dish that he rebelled on after hearing about Michael's death, went to Sydney. Sydney, if you remember, she went to Empire, she spent all her money, and she goes to this last restaurant. She eats this dish, and it becomes her favorite meal. That is this exact dish. So it's kind of an interesting, like, red string of fate, if you know what that is. It's like this whole concept where everybody's like connected, and like there actually be like magnetic like ties from your person to you, that just the universe, quote unquote, puts together. So that's like a red string of fate moment. Which of course this dish, this one rebellion dish, ends up leading to Sydney coming to the beef, back when it was still a sandwich shop. So we do have some other moments in this season that are also very important. There's like this moment of Sydney clearly checking him, but it's like in his panic, this is another moment of her calming him down. So he's like panicking, he starts thinking, having flashbacks of Claire, and like he thinks he's messed it up, the service is running, he's panicking on the line, and then Sydney's voice just like comes to him clear, and she's like, "Hey, you need to calm down." And then she's like, "I'm not your babysitter. You need to calm down." And he does. And that's another moment of just Sydney being the calm to Carmy, even though words people might have you thinking that another Claire, another girl, that Claire is his piece. We actually see evidence multiple times of Sydney actually being his piece. Okay, so another moment we have is episode 3 of season 7, where Carmi notices Sydney's outfit. He's like, "You look nice." And it's interesting because they like never compliment each other, but it is a standout moment just because um this is right after she's had like an interview to leave the restaurant, basically to work with Shapiro or Adam. He's like asked her to maybe be a CDC and like start her own place with him. And there's just like a interesting like flirtation, but also not. Like he's just acknowledging she looks nice, because Sydney does look nice. And then there's also, because it's not just them in the scene, there's also Marcus, who is another like important character in the show. Oh wait, I didn't talk about something. Okay, I will mention this little like back panel real quick. Um, in season 2, Sydney and Marcus do have like this thing where some people were shipping them. But anyway, it comes out that Marcus does like Sydney, and he asks her out, like, but the way he asks her out, he's like, oh, like, he like gives her compliments, and she's like, girl, what are you talking? She like kind of shuts him down, and then he's like, what are you doing after work? And she's like, probably gonna barf. Like, I'm kind of busy. And he's like, what about after? Like, would you wanna? And she's like, oh no, bye. She just like panics and leaves. But like in contrast, right after that scene is on the table scene, where they like Sydney and Carmen are both like complimenting each other. They're saying, "You make me better at this." Like, um, you're really good. Like, there's a moment where he's like, "Oh, like I bet your cooking was fire." Like, again, that's Fire Chef. But like they're able to give compliments to each other, but like it's not like awkward or like unreciprocated, whereas Sydney and Marcus, it was clearly unreciprocated. So again, back to season 3. Okay, in this scene, um before this point, Marcus and Carmy were talking, but then Sydney enters the scene and Carmy's like, you look nice. So in this scene, like Sydney and Carmy kind of reveal their Sydcarmy voices to each other. Like they have a very specific way of speaking to each other that they do not speak to with other people. Like, and it's very evident in the scene. But people have a compilation of it. I don't know how to do the editing and stuff, but if not, I would include a clip. But go on Twitter, and you might find one. Um, but yeah, they have like specialized Sid Carmy voices for each other. Like in this scene, um, I think Marcus asks Sydney a question, and she's like I don't know, I think about getting through Wednesdays, and then she's like, oh, what about you? Like her voice like immediately softens when she's addressing Carmy versus when she's addressing Marcus. So it's kind of interesting. It's just funny the way they talk to each other, like their tone of voice. So then another moment, I don't I have to check this. I'm not sure if it actually is 3-9, but I guess it is. I guess it is because I did check my sources. But anyway, there's like this episode where Sydney's looking at reviews of the restaurant, the Bear, and she's kind of feeling like downtrodden, like unincluded because even when the restaurant does get hype, it's a lot of return of Carmen Berzado, the famed chef. Like every review will focus only on Carmy when she is very much just as a part of this restaurant as he is. She made all the progress while he was I don't want to be like that, but he was kind of like gallivanting off with Claire, like being avoidant of the restaurant. So it's interesting. We see this moment of her like reading reviews and noting it's just Carmy in this. And this whole time, there's also the argument of this like partnership agreement that she's avoiding signing. So it's like the partnership is like, are they partners? That's a big argument again of this season. And there's this song that plays that was written specifically for the Bear. I can't understand that enough. It was really written for the Bear, for season 3, for the episode. And it's like, don't know what I'd do without you. Um, as she's looking at reviews of him. Okay, thank you. There's just so many like instances of this. So yeah, the music is very important as I mentioned, and the music also reinforces that the relationship is very important or special and like separate from the other relationships of the show. And then I guess last mention is the funeral um of Ever, which is like a restaurant that Carmen used to work at. And we see Carmy invite Sydney to it. And it's an interesting moment because they like have been misaligned this entire season. But then in this moment, he's like reaching out to her. Um, and this is like where the title I included for the season was. But within this conversation, she's like, oh, Carmy says like Ever, like you should come. And she's like, no, like I don't know if I would be wanted there, and he's like it's Ever, like you should come. So he's like insistent on inviting her to come to this place. So it's like an interesting moment of is he asking her out? I guess maybe. But yeah, like it's a moment of him reaching out to her, even though they're also very tired at this moment and they're very like misaligned. But this is like a one moment of him reaching out to like bridge that gap, I guess. And of course, we have the introduction of this lamb dish which she'll say still stuck on the like she says to him still stuck on the lamb. And this interesting moment where right after she leaves that conversation, they pan from like Carmi making the lamb dish to like him staring down at it and throwing it in the trash. And fans were quick to notice that the lamb dish looks a lot like the headband or the scarf that Sydney is wearing in this very picture, which we'll come back to. Okay, so then we have another panic attack. That's not funny. Okay, there's another panic attack, but this time it's Sydney who has a panic attack. It's kind of sad actually, but this is like near the very end of the season. But Sydney, like, she starts to think about how she's tied to this place and how it would be like kind of like traumatic for her to leave because she's grown so many relationships at the Bear, but she's also like struggling with if she should stay in a place where she doesn't feel like included or wanted. And she starts to really panic. And it's kind of interesting contrast between Carmy, who calmed down at the thought of Sydney, and Sydney, who is now like really agitated, or not even agitated, but like stressed out at the thought of Carmy. But yeah, it's another interesting moment of their dynamic, I think, in the long run. So then we're going to season 4, which is the most recent season that released. And I titled this one Because You're the Bear. Yeah, I did that. Okay, so basically, this season is about if you are able to collaborate or um reinvent. Wait, I think I changed this. I guess it didn't change. If you're able to like collaborate and come to agreements after actively avoiding vibrant collaboration. The reason I include that word is because basically in season 3, Carmi has this list of like non-negotiables, things we have to include in order to be successful and get this star. And one of those things are vibrant collaboration. The gag is, as Miss Kiki Palmer would say, he avoided vibrant collaboration the entire season before. All of season 3, he did not collaborate with Sydney. Like she would say something, he would say, "No, actually, we're doing this." He did not collaborate with her. But in this season, we do see a shift where Carmi kind of he realizes the error of his ways. He realizes he doesn't want to be like his abusive past boss, and instead he does end up collaborating with Sydney a lot more and kind of like trusting Sydney and what she's capable of doing. At the same time, Sydney starts to stand up a lot more to Carmi, and like if he has ideas, she says, "Well, actually, I think we should do this instead." And I think that dynamic definitely will be included and continue into season 5. Spoiler alert, that's just my theory. Um, but of course, there is still the subtext of Sydney potentially leaving the restaurant because she has been offered the opportunity to work with Adam Shapiro. Um, it's interesting because this season we kind of see even more of the bear being like a family both inside and outside the restaurant. That kind of ties into also season 3, the ending of season 3, because they had like this party at Sydney's apartment. um, Everybody at the bear is there except for Carmi because of course he's not there. He was going through a lot at that moment. But yeah, it's just interesting because it's clear that they are all a family. Like they start out as co-workers and at the end of season 1, but especially by the end of season 4, they are family and they will help each other. Their family grows, expands, but they're still a family. And then, of course, the one of the key dynamics is a transfer of leadership once again. Not only to see if Sydney, like before she was a sous chef in season 1, she becomes the CDC leadership in season 2. She's leadership but not appreciated in season 3. In season 4, it's like Sydney maybe Carmi doesn't need to be there at all. Like, is Carmi needed for the bear to run? Um, which of course he is in that he helped build the team that they currently have. Like everybody goes through their own arcs. I'll mention like Tina goes through her own arc, Richie goes through his own arc, Marcus goes through his own arc. Even Sweeps in season 4, he starts to go through his own arc. Ibrahim, I'm not gonna forget to mention Manny and Angel as well. Hopefully they get it reviewed next season, but I doubt it because anyway. But yeah, like a lot of the characters in the show do go on their own arcs, and that's through Carmi and Sydney's leadership and trusting to them and training them. Um, but now is the question: does Carmi need to continue to be in the restaurant at all? So some standout scenes from this season is the first episode. Usually the first episode they give us something. So like in season 4, episode 1, um Carmi comes back and he like uses the sorry sign. He's like, "I'm sorry," and she's like, "For what?" That's kind of what you see in the bottom picture that I included. She's like, "You got to be more specific. Like, what are you sorry for?" Um, and anyway, Sydney like I mean she starts like calling him out. She's like, "You don't need dysfunction. Like you don't need dysfunction to live, um, or to breathe." And she asks him. And he's like, "I don't like," oh, so Carmi's like, "I don't like dysfunction." And Sydney asks him, "What do you like?" And he like turns to her. There's nobody, I mean, this whole scene, there's nobody in the kitchen besides them. There's no food out. There's no pots and pans. It's just them standing there in the morning together, just the two of them in the kitchen. And he turns to her and he's like, "I like this." I'm not sure what they want us to read into that. I guess they don't, but it's clear Carmi likes Sydney, at least them being together. He likes them, the dynamic of them together in the kitchen. Or not in the kitchen, because nothing's going on in the kitchen at this time. They're not cooking or anything. He likes the dynamic of Sydney and Carmi together. As do I, as a Sid Carmi shipper. So then we have the timing of the change in the agreement. So the big part of the season, of course, is Carmi like trying to figure out if he actually needs to be there, or maybe he shouldn't be there. Maybe he shouldn't be part of the restaurant anymore. And anyway, he has like this big argument, I guess, with Claire. Sorry to mention her name again. Um, but yeah, he like runs to her place. They start arguing because he hasn't talked to her in like 2 months. Um, after he got stuck in the fridge, basically, not basically, yes, after he got stuck in the fridge, he never talked to her. So he randomly shows up at her house, and they're like arguing about like what might have gone wrong in their relationship that they had. And meanwhile, it was like 3 months long. Okay, anyways. But right after their argument, he like takes a breath, like exits her house. He finally apologizes to her, right? He finally says I'm sorry. Meanwhile, he says I'm sorry to Sydney all the time. But anyway, he finally says I'm sorry to Claire. He walks down the steps, he takes a deep breath, and then he texts or he finds Natalie, his older sister's brother's number. He calls him, he's like, "Hey Pete, I want to make a change in the agreement." We later reveal what that change is. So yeah, the fact that he decided to change that after talking with Claire, that shows that Sydney's on his mind, basically. But anyway, next scene. So there's of course Worms, which is an iconic episode of The Bear. I don't care what they say. This was written by Io and Lionel, who Io plays Sydney in The Bear, and then Lionel plays Marcus in The Bear. They're both black, and they wrote this episode about Sydney, and basically it's a Sydney-centric episode, the entire episode. But anyway, part of it is like Sydney being forced to sort of babysitting her niece, as in her cousin's daughter. Is that her niece? Yeah. Um, and this moment where she's like kind of comparing the restaurants in this like analogy of houses. Like she's like one house has like a pizza oven, or one house has unlimited pizza, and the other house like kind of stinks, but like I have a bed there. So like comparing the bear to Adam Shapiro's place, which she just visited that day. And he's like, and I have a bed there. Still talking about the bear, and there's like this older brother, and that's her talking about Carmy. And then immediately TJ, who is the niece, is like, "Oh, you got a crush," and Sydney's like, "No, no, I don't have a crush." But like the fact that they mention that, kind of like it's kind of interesting. They're playing on like, is this platonic or is it not? Because why are you mentioning the older brother as like a thing that's a good thing of this house, you know? Um, and there, of course, the question of like what her role is again in the Russian. That's kind of been a thing throughout all seasons of The Bear, but like, um, TJ asks like, what if they don't let you fix it? What if they don't let you fix the house? Which then he's like, that's a good question because I don't know. What if I'm not able to like? What if they don't let me fix? Which is kind of like a question of season 3. Like, is Sydney actually able to implement the changes that she wants to? Um, but yeah, that's an interesting question that we kind of get into, and it's kind of interesting because like children are very blunt. Like they say when a children says something, they might be wrong, but sometimes there's a lot of truth to what children say because they don't have as much of a filter. So it was interesting that they had TJ call out that comment. So then there's Alley Part 2, much before the finale, Alley finale. Where it's kind of interesting. I don't really like Christopher Storer for doing this because I don't know why you're giving Sydney so much angst, but Sydney ends up going to the hospital because her dad has a heart attack. And in the lead up to this, she like tells Carmen, she's like, my dad, like she just randomly, she keeps on getting this call, and she answers the phone. She finds out her dad had a heart attack, and she's like really scared, and she like immediately she tells Carmi, or he goes outside to talk to her. He actually wants to talk to her about the agreement, but that gets completely derailed because she's like, my dad, like he's in the hospital. She's really freaking out, and he's like, we're gonna do that. Like he makes a plan. He's like, we're gonna go. I'm gonna go in the van, and we're gonna do this. And he's kind of like comforting her, but like saying like these are actions we can do together. We're gonna make it. And she's like, no, 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 like you can't come with me because you need to run the restaurant. But anyway, he's like trying to comfort her, and that's this moment of like closeness, and that um not only can he kind of comfort her, but also she like confides in him. She's like, please don't tell anybody, like please don't tell anybody about this. And he of course agrees. Not it. But he does end up telling everybody because he's like worried about it. But yeah, it kind of shows again how special their relationship specifically is, because it's starting that like emphasizing again that reliance on each other. Then we have Bears, which is like I think the longest episode of season 4, which is another under the table scene. That's the second one, but it's not nearly as iconic. Or I guess maybe in a different way, but it's not the same. We all know it's not the same because this time 50 people are under that table and not just two. It's probably like 10, 11 people total or something. Um, but there is a couple moments like Sydney agreeing that what Carmi's actually afraid of is math, which is like I think that's an allegory for Sydney, but that's for my like if you know the levels of an iceberg, that's for like the bottom of my iceberg, Sydcarmy, but we're not talking about this in this presentation. Anyway, um during this episode, like Carmy, it's subtle, but you can tell in the camera moments, like Carmy is looking for Sydney at this wedding. Um, it'll show him like going through the crowd, and he'll like see a black woman. There's like two or three of them at this, and he'll like turn to her, but it's not Sydney, so he keeps moving. Um, there's also the mention, like Sydney said, like to Stevie, who's played by John Mulaney. He's like, yeah, there's like this Carmy specific smell, and like that's specific, like Carmy specific smell, like it's working in the restaurant. It's interesting that they just notice each other's smell and they're like joking over it, but yeah, it's like another example of their closeness. And then um, again, we have this mention of the best meal, but this time instead of talking to Marcus about it, Sydney talks to Donna, which is Carmi's mother, about it. And Sydney has learned by this point that like Carmi's mother was not really the best person. Like she was pretty low-key abusive to her children, or like very kind of manipulative, and they're definitely traumatized from her. But she like kind of shows Donna grace in this moment, and she ends up confiding in her that like the best meal she ever had was Carmi's. She talks about like Carmi's so great and he really cares a lot. And Donna actually remarks like you guys are close, which is interesting because this is like one of the only moments when someone outside of the Sid Carmy shippers acknowledges that Sydney and Carmy are close as people, or as something more, not just business partners. Am I right? So, anyway, to mention a couple more moments, there's Sydney's dream in episode 8 of season 4, and that's actually it's interesting. This is like the start of the season, but we don't get this moment until um episode 8. So like we show a flash of Sydney opening her eyes, but then the season starts. But now in episode 8 we go back to that. We see like a dream where she's like cooking, and the kitchen's getting destroyed, like it's getting flooded with water, but like Sydney has her own cooking show, which is an interesting parallel to Carmi's dream, which we'll talk about later on. Um that Carmi has in season 1. There's also like this bleeding bear in the background of her dream. And as I mentioned, yeah, it ends with her waking up from this dream. Which is interesting because like it starts off with Sydney waking up, and then it pans to like Carmi experiencing Groundhog Day or not being able to continue on. So I don't know, it's just interesting how they framed this show to like constantly pair Sydney and Carmi together. Um Thematically, yeah. So then we have like this moment where they're prepping for service, and like Natalie asks Carmi to get this photograph, or like this photo album for his mother. And Sydney just like said something about it, and then like Carmy automatically just like mirror or copies exactly what she said. Um, Sydney's like, oh, like was it a photo that you liked? And then Carmy's like, I don't know, was it like a photo that I liked? And it's just funny because um it's just another example of like Carmy actively listening to Sydney after like years of miscommunication. Meanwhile, the show actually doesn't take place over that long of a time. But yeah, it's interesting to see that moment. It was pretty funny to me. Um, and then again, it's like this moment of Carmy working on this lamb dish, but now it happens to be the same colors as the dress that Sydney was wearing to the wedding in the previous episode. So again, it's another moment of Sydney's clothing being inspiration for Carmy's lamb dish. So yeah, that's quite interesting if you ask me. And then of course we have the infamous episode 410. This episode was really interesting to me. I honestly think we should have seen more of Sydcarmy in this episode, or at least Sydney and Carmy interacting. But it does start out like the first, I want to say 7 or 8 minutes of the episode, it's just them, before Richie actually interrupts them. Um, but yeah, there actually was a previous scene, unless they're gonna cut back to it this season, but I doubt it because the idea of this season, as in season 5, is like kind of interesting, but it's different than all the previous seasons. So I doubt they're gonna include a moment from the trailer of season 4. But there was another alley scene that got cut. Yay, Christopher Store. But anyway, so there's this whole argument, Carmi going back and forth with Sydney because she finds out that in the agreement that Carmi changed in episode 3, he removed himself from the bear and gave 25% to Sydney, 25% to Natalie, and then 50% to Cicero, who is the uncle that they owe money to. So he's completely out of the agreement, and they argue about that. It's like, why are you leaving? Like, I thought we were supposed to do this together. There's like, um, this it comes up that Sydney was actually going to leave the restaurant as well, and Carmi was like, "Oh, like I get it, but like like you could do so well here as well." And Sydney's like, "Why? But you're leaving. Like, why would I? What's the point? You're leaving." And Carmi's like, you don't need me. Again, there's this conversation of like needing versus wanting things. And Sydney's like, I know I don't need you, but that's not the point. You're supposed to be here. So again, they never explicitly say this, but it's like Sydney wants him to be there because she wanted to work with him. That's the whole reason she came here. Um, but again, there was this conversation of needs versus wants that really started at the beginning of the season. Um, but yeah, like I mean at the beginning of the show, but it becomes even more prominent in this season especially. And then there's like this infamous line out of oh, I didn't include this line. I will say this. There is another line where of course that's where the title of my section is. Um he's like, I believe in you more than I've ever believed in myself. Carmi says this to Sydney. Okay. He's like, any chance of anything good happened when you walked in. Again, that's a callback to the first episode of the show starts on the day that she enters the restaurant. I'm just quoting the lyric. I'm just quoting the lines of the scene, and he says like these very like love confession heavy lines, but we're just supposed to take it as I don't know what we're supposed to take it as. That's why I'm taking it as romantic. It could be platonic, but the way he's saying it, the context of all these scenes, having gone through the dynamic over the different seasons, he says that, and then she's like, anything good started when you walked in, and any chance of surviving, it's with you. Of this restaurant surviving, it's with you. She's like, how can you say that? And of course, he says the infamous lines, because you're the bear. This line is very important as well because the show's called The Bear. Like the implication that Sydney is the bear, not that Carmi is the bear, but Sydney is the bear. The bear being a nickname that Carmen's family, the entire family has. Like they're the Burzatos, like they're the bear. Like they call each other bear as a nickname. But really Sydney is the bear. Well, let's talk about this a little bit more, but it's interesting to see who else has said that statement and why it might not hit as hard when that other person says it, or why it's interesting that Carmi is now saying it to Sydney. But of course, they start arguing again, and Sydney's like, "You're my partner," and then Carmi responds, "I'm your friend." And then she's like, "Well, you're not acting like it." Like the whole thing is that they're not friends. Like I think a lot of people like to say that they act as if they're friends, but they really don't. And yeah, it's an interesting I guess it's an interesting dilemma, I guess, because in a work setting, you're like told like you shouldn't have like romantic feelings or whatever. Like this is the place of work. Like this is not a place for romance. But the way they're connected, the way they have to partner with each other, um, the way the relationship builds over the course of these seasons, there's like an implication that something clearly other than friendship is there. They even say it in this scene. So that was a lot. I'm gonna pause again and we're gonna go through some more. But I guess to end off this section, I'm just gonna talk about I'm not gonna talk, I'm just gonna present this next slide, which of course is my collage. Let's do a compilation of Carmi staring at City. And these are not all of them. There's a lot more, as you saw in the previous slides I included. These are like new pictures. I didn't do any repeats, but yeah, there's many instances of him just staring at her. And I think in terms of like a subtle reason, even if you don't know that you like someone, like you do catch yourself staring at them a lot. So it's just interesting. They definitely stare at each other a lot, or specifically, Carmi will stare at Sydney a lot, as in a lot, a lot, a lot. So yeah, with that, we'll just end for the night. Hope you've enjoyed so far, but yeah, that's my Sydcarmy thesis part two.